Atticus Finch, one of America's great fictional characters from the book To Kill a Mockingbird, offers this advice to his daughter Scout. He says, "You will never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and walk around in it." This episode of Courageous Conversations About Our Schools is about a high school teacher who has taken Finch's advice to heart. His name is Jason Morgan, and he teaches high school math in Compton, California.
I was talking with my neighbor during the height of the George Floyd murder, and we were talking about how it's going to be really hard for communities to come together because we don't live with each other. And I cannot get everyone to change zip codes and move and make these kind of diverse communities. But I thought about how could we bring our youth together in different settings so that our youth could actually develop this empathy with communities that they normally would not engage with because we're kind of segregated by zip code.
Hi, everyone. This is your host, Ken Futernick. Part 1 of this episode is a conversation I had with Mr. Morgan, who will talk about a program he founded called SEND. That is, the Student Empathy Network for Diversity. Morgan's vision for SEND is to have high school students with very different experiences and perspectives develop empathy and mutual understanding, essentially by having them walk around in each other's skin. His students from Compton spend time literally walking around with students from communities elsewhere in the Los Angeles area. And those students from outside of Compton experience what it's like to live and go to school where Mr. Morgan and his students live and go to school. In the second part of this episode, you'll hear from several of the students who've participated in SEND and how it's affected their lives. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to produce this story is that it illustrates really powerfully a number of bridging strategies that several previous guests of mine, all experts in conflict resolution, have said can help defuse the culture wars in education. Guests like Amanda Ripley, who talks about contact theory, the idea that people from different groups become less prejudiced towards one another after spending time together, and Dr. Peter Coleman from Columbia University, who says that certain types of movement with others can be conducive to more positive psychological states, cooperative social relations, and constructive forms of conflict resolution. And then there is the journalist Monica Guzman, a guest who spoke to me about what it takes to escape 3 common traps that often divide us: sorting, othering, and siloing. What's really cool is that in Mr. Morgan's story, you will see evidence of each of these strategies. Okay, let's meet Mr. Morgan. Jason, I want to welcome you to Courageous Conversations About Our Schools.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Great, and we're going to be hearing from you now to give us some background on this program called SEND. And after that, we're going to be joined by some of the students who have participated in this program. But first, just tell our listeners a little bit about you and where and what you teach and how you came to be a teacher.
So I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. It's lower income, socioeconomic population in the South Los Angeles area. And I grew up in largely Black and brown neighborhoods, and I'm Black, African American myself. So we grew up going to schools, and then in the first grade, my first grade teacher told my mom at a parent-teacher conference that you need to bus him out of here. And at the time in the 80s, there was a busing program trying to get folks to be able to have opportunities to have a more equitable educational experience. I know in the 70s, there was kind of like this forced busing, but in the 80s, it was optional. And so we did that. My mom took that offer or that recommendation and then sent me first. And then my brother and sister came later on down the line. And I got bused 33 miles from South Central LA to Northridge, California. And so I went from black and brown to predominantly white, Jewish, and Korean. And so there's this like huge culture shock, even just like how the streets were set up. So, I mean, the streets were clean. I mean, on my block, and it's not like that anymore, but on my block, the trash would like fill up in the sewer all the way up to the top. And, you could just see everything spilling onto the street. And so I went to these neighborhoods where, everything was pristine, the immaculate homes that my friends had. So I had a chance to like even go visit their homes, and even just like things, little small things, like they had these like levels in their home where you would like step down or descend into the living room, and this nice plush carpet, and they had cable and all these different channels. I'm like, man, you guys living the dream out here. And so those things just kind of stood out to me, even so much to the point where I want a house where I can kind of descend into a room, so to speak, just because those things stood out to me and contrasted my own experience growing up in South Central. But it was a big culture shock. I learned different things about the Jewish culture and celebrating Hanukkah and the dreidel. And I found that to be a very rich cultural experience and cultural exchange for my classmates to get to know me and me to get to know them. I learned about line dancing, just things that are just kind of foreign to me growing up in South Central. But it always stood out to me that I had to leave my community in order to get a quality education. And I could say that it was actually night and day. Like I've lived firsthand the inequities in education that they talk about, because I had a great education at Topeka Drive Elementary School in Northridge, California. I love my teachers. I love the experience that I had there. But there was this learning curve, because when I got there, I wasn't actually prepared. I went from the highest performing kid in the first grade in South Central to the lowest performing kid in Northridge. And I remember a teacher asking me a math question. She just went around the room asking a math question. And then I saw like halfway, one of the kids, his answer was what he said. I was like, oh, I'm going to use that one. And she just kept going. And they got to me, and it was the same question as was asked previously. And I was like, I had it locked and loaded. I think I just stopped paying attention too. And I said, what she said. And then the teacher said, well, what did she say? And I felt like an idiot. I felt like I didn't belong. I was the only black kid in class. I'm around 7 or 8 years old. And I grew up with these stereotypes that if I'm black, I'm ignorant, I'm violent, I'm not going to amount to anything, I'm going to go to prison, all these different stereotypes I'm like receiving. And I'm just now learning about this thing called slavery. And so I'm also just angry. And so I'm just learning all this different history. And it's not coming from school, right? My parents introduced me to the civil rights movement. My mom, bless her soul, she would get the books. She would take me to the library. I would read about Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X. All that type of historical reference came from the home or from my own studies within the library. It didn't come from school. So I'm wrestling through these different stereotypes. I'm wrestling through this tough history at a very young age, and then feeling this pressure like I needed to represent my community as a young black male, and that I was failing at that because, I couldn't answer this question. And I struggled with math, which ironically, I'm a math teacher now. And so those things stood out to me. And my experience there was just like very hands-on. The teachers took a vested interest in me. Eventually, I got it into the gifted and talented program, got on student council. By third grade, second grade was a struggle. But by third grade, I've adapted to the situation that I'm in, to my own personal desire just to be excellent. But I also wanted to make sure that people knew that all black folks or black men did not fit this stereotype. So I wanted to make sure that whatever the negative stereotype was, I was going to be the opposite as this kind of counter narrative to what the messages that I was receiving at a young age. And I shouldn't even have to be worrying about that. But the truth of the matter is that you will feel that from society, from different places. You think that, people might say, oh, maybe my parents taught me that. My parents didn't share any of those stereotypes. I didn't get that from them. Uh, they're empowering me, but you just kind of, you feel that and you get it. And I know I was dealing with it from an early age.
It sounds like this experience that you had going to Northridge and being bused 33 miles away from home had a pretty profound effect on you. And it probably led to your decision to become a teacher. And you alluded to the fact that you are now a math teacher, despite the fact that you had some trouble in math as a student yourself, but you had this idea, this mission in your mind that you wanted people to understand that the stereotypes people had about you and other Black people in your community were not accurate. And did that ultimately have something to do with why you created this SEND program, the Student Empathy Network for Diversity?
Definitely. So this program has just been a passion project of mine. It started off conceptually, but it's definitely much informed by my experiences growing up. And when I transferred to Northridge, right, I had friends who were out there. My best friend's name was Evan Zucker. So a young Jewish kid from Northridge, California. I always say I was probably the only Black boy from South Central who had a Jewish best friend named Evan Zucker. And I visited Evan's house. It was a beautiful home. We had that exchange. He got to know me, and I got to experience his community. But it was always one-sided, right? He never came to South Central. Right? He never stepped foot in our rented 2-bedroom home. He never played in the street on Dalton Avenue where we played baseball in the middle of the street, cars coming. So he never came to my community. And so that kind of stood out to me, that it was just this kind of one-way street. And they think of our community as being disadvantaged, when really it's just like we have other advantages that you won't find in maybe a more affluent community, but they're really special things that are found in, our community. But that kind of stayed with me to inform the SEND program, because it was a rich experience, right? Our diverse backgrounds and this cultural exchange really made us better. It made us more empathetic. It helped us to understand each other's stories in a deeper level, because if we never met, there was no way we really were going to cross paths. There's no way I'm going to truly learn about their culture or what it's like to be in Northridge or as a young Jewish kid, and all these different things that I got to learn came about because these communities that are pretty much segregated came together on the school's campus, and I got to know them, they got to know me, and so I found that to be a very rich experience that has helped inform, what I do, and help to make me more well-rounded. Like, we have this idea where we want everyone to kind of study abroad because of the values that you can have, but we have a lot of diversity here in the States as well. We just have to kind of get together. That experience stayed with me, where I wanted to say, you know what? The kids today need to have that experience as well. I was talking with my neighbor during the height of the George Floyd murder, and we were talking about how it's going to be really hard for communities to come together because we don't live with each other. We're separated from one another. And I cannot get everyone to change zip codes and move and make these kind of diverse communities. And there's some pockets where that exists, but people are just going to I want to be here, and it's a certain type of demographic. But I thought about, how can we bring our youth together in different settings so that our youth could actually develop this empathy with communities that they normally would not engage with because we're kind of segregated by zip code. So I had the concept. I had people who were ready to roll with me. I said, hey, let's make it happen. I got students, and let's try to reach out to another community and then see if we can get send off the ground.
Once you got the program off the ground, what were some of the first activities you conducted? Did you have a sort of field trips of kids coming to Compton or Compton kids going to Silver Lake, or what happened? What were some of the first things you did, and how did those activities work? Did they work well?
Every single activity was fantastic. For those who attended, our first send activity was a Griffith Park observatory hike / scavenger hunt. And so we all met early Saturday morning. My students from Compton did not go on hikes, and they did not bring the shoes for hikes. I'm like, are those Vans? What are you doing? And some of the students like, these are the only shoes that I have. Now, be mindful, there are students in Compton who hike. Compton High School actually has a Compton hiking club that's put on by one of our Send Fellows' parents, Billy Ney, and he leads the Compton Hiking Club. But for our Dominguez Fellows, this was most of their first time doing a hike like this. And it was just an amazing experience. We had some parents who were there as well, and we typically connect in a circle at the beginning of our shared movement experience. So students are getting to know each other. My young son, who was 5 at the time, he was there. And so then we just kind of connect with everyone, and just seeing the kids smile, getting up early. Our students do not like getting up early, but I really want them to see that there is power in getting up early and connecting and getting out into nature, that you feel like you accomplished something. It kind of really gets you going for the day. I want them to at least be able to take that with them and say, you know what, maybe I don't need to sleep in every weekend. Maybe there are things that I might be missing out on. But I remember Aaron, man, Aaron Butler. He's a young black man. He just graduated from Dominguez High School, one of our basketball players, or captain of the basketball team. And he was just commenting on like, man, we need to do this every week. Just getting out in nature. I like this, Mr. Morgan. I like this. And that was his first time hiking. And we're just seeing, you're part of this other community too, because they're seeing other people who are from the city just there. And we're just saying hi. We're having them connect with people that they don't know. So as we go up, you see students talking with parents, students talking with students and teachers. Everybody's just kind of connecting, asking questions, just very organic. And then when we get to the top, they have to break up into teams and do a scavenger hunt and bring out these different pieces. And just kind of that collaboration, teamwork is just really binds people together. They don't know what to expect. And then they shared at the bottom once we got to the bottom of the hike. And our students are just very introspective. Like the reflections that they pull out from the experience are just always great. And then we sit down and we eat. So we have a meal together. There's something about breaking bread together that's just very powerful when it comes to bringing groups together. And so that was our first experience. We also engaged in movement-based workshops led by a phenomenal teacher that I know, award-winning dance educator, Nicole Robinson. She did a fall workshop and a spring workshop for us. And so she uses dance and movement to really foster community and to have these kind of deep conversations about how we interact as humans, right? Are we neglecting certain people, neglecting spaces, things like that? So it was just a very powerful experience. But something that we did not expect was kind of the social, emotional, positive impact that it had on our students, where students were just saying like, I needed this. I needed to be part of this community. Then we brought families and students to Compton. We really wanted to kind of showcase that communities like Compton have this kind of rich history and legacy, and people who haven't been here have all of these stereotypes about Compton. But right before you form that opinion, that conclusion, why don't you come to the city? Why don't you come to the community? So it was important that we were hosting workshops on our Dominguez campus here in Compton, and folks would comment on like, man, people are so welcoming. I love the campus. And some of our students will talk about our campus, but they had an outsider perspective. They said we thought it was a beautiful campus because we still have, more nature on campus. It's not like this concrete jungle. And so they enjoy that. They didn't know that we have an airport. So we do yoga with Growing Up Compton with a former Dominguez High School alum, Bobby Jones. And he played basketball in Italy for a stint professionally. And so he does yoga at the Compton airport. So we're there right by the tarmac and doing yoga in Compton, planes flying down behind us, right next to Compton's Aeronautical Museum. Most people don't know that we have like aeronautical programs or learn about, we have equestrian programs, Compton Cowboys, all different things. And then one of our last events was a hike in Mojeska Canyon. We wanted to represent the Orange County fellow. And so we did a big major hike out there in Orange County. So we just wanted the students to kind of see the richness in all the different communities, but especially those who had stereotypes about Compton, because students from Marshall would comment on how they would be told by their friends, like, your mom teaches in Compton, or you're going to Compton. Oh, you shouldn't do that. It's dangerous. And they were like, have you been there? No, but
So when students say that they needed to do this and they couldn't wait to come back and do more of it, what do you think they were getting out of it? What have you heard them say? And we'll hear from them in just a little bit, and they can tell us directly, but just what did you sense they were getting from this experience of being together?
From my observation and just kind of putting everything together in terms of their comments, it just seemed like people were having a hard time when it came to social, emotional, and mental wellness. There's just kind of this mental health piece where, I don't know, people were just dealing with a whole lot. And this gave them an opportunity to connect with other human beings, to create together, and to express themselves that maybe they didn't have an outlet for. And this kind of gave them a safe and a brave space to do that. And it was just kind of outside of the box. They never did anything like this before. Like, what's a dance workshop, or how does that build community? I don't want to be a dancer, and you don't have to be a dancer to be involved with it, or doing yoga, or going on a hike, or having these different conversations about equity or your experiences, or just even the context of like, you're doing these things, but you're doing them with students who are from different communities than you and different backgrounds. But it seemed like there is this big need to just really connect as humans, especially after COVID. But there was this also kind of philosophical alignment. So I use movement in my math classroom, and the idea behind SEND was like, how could we use the power of movement? Because in math, it really created these strong communities within my math classroom where the students kind of felt like neighbors or family. And from there, I could actually do lots of collaboration. I could actually teach content through mathematics. And when they work together in teams, because my math classroom is very collaborative, the movement kind of really helped to facilitate this community building effect. And so for SEND, we thought about, well, how could we do that with segregated communities and use movement to really bring people together? But LA 84's mission, right? They want to leverage the power of movement, play, and sport. And part of the idea behind the grant was students getting access to movement, play, and sport coming out of the COVID pandemic and really addressing the mental health crisis for youth. And that wasn't necessarily originally a premise for the SEND program, but I noticed as they engaged in these shared movement experiences that it was definitely having a positive impact on the mental wellness and emotional wellness of our community. which I did not anticipate. And I know LA 84, that's part of like their mission. And they feel like that's why everyone should have access to play and sport, because it helps with mental wellness. But that wasn't an original design of the SEND program, but it was definitely a very strong plus that I think helped keep the community together long term, right? To try to find time on your busy schedule on Saturday morning. Don't feel like getting up to do this again and again with this group. Even to the point where maybe I was tired and I would have my advisors or students say, "When's the next send event?" Okay, I guess we're gonna keep it going. And so they would motivate me, because I'm not used to that. I'm used to always having to force kids to attend and like, okay, what do I need to do to get you to come here? Not you asking me, when are we going to keep this going?
I'm intrigued by your comments about movement. And there's a guy named Peter Coleman. He's a professor at Columbia University who has a book on toxic polarization and how we can escape it. And I interviewed him a while ago to help me and my listeners understand how it is that we can end the culture wars in education and all this polarization that seems to be on the rise around our school systems, not to mention our communities at large and our nation. But I was really surprised and intrigued by something he said about the importance of moving. And he said that if you want people to depolarize or to come together, get beyond their stereotypes and their walls they set up between them and the silos that exist in, you have to get people to move. And I asked him what he meant by that. And Peter said by getting out and moving and just listening, some pretty amazing things happen. But I hear you saying some of the same things, that your instincts and what you were thinking needed to happen by getting people together was that you'd have to move. And you did that initially by going to Griffith Park. You moved when you were doing yoga. There's something about that that I don't fully understand, but I'm intrigued that both you and this guy, Peter Coleman from Columbia University, point to it as being kind of a critical part of overcoming these sort of toxic divides.
The cool thing is we don't fully understand that, which makes it like very rich ground to pursue and research. I know even just for my own practice as an educator, right? You have this field of embodied cognition and how your physical body and senses involved when it comes to how your brain operates and when it comes to learning, that there are these kind of nonverbal ways of being and communicating that have a strong impact on us, that it is very hard to describe like what's happening because it's nonverbal, it's physical. It's you having to get out or feel the sun on your face or what the sound of the crunch of the twigs and the dirt going up a hill. Like you don't know what that's like, unless you get out there and do that. And then who are you with when you're going through that experience? And how are you making these connections? Because part of the idea for the SEND program was to combat not just combat the extreme polarization between different communities based on us just really not understanding each other, but also at the same time, how do we foster this empathy if people are not coming together? And a great way to get people together is to get them to get up and move. And not everyone is playing sports. Not everyone's connected to these different programs. And sometimes with school, our kids are just so inundated with testing and homework and all these other responsibilities and extracurriculars that, a lot of them don't even have time to engage in those things that really bring them joy or even make time to connect with other communities.
Jason, I want to bring this to a close soon because we're going to bring the students in shortly and have them talk about this experience from their perspective. But I want to ask you about an aspect of SEND, it's Student Empathy Network for Diversity. And I think as your probably well aware it's 2023, and one of the issues at the center of the culture wars is around this idea of equity and diversity and inclusion, which on the surface sounds like things that everybody should be for, that we want equity, we want to celebrate our diversity, and yet they've become divisive concepts. And some people have railed against them. Politicians and in the state of Georgia, they just in the last few days have deleted the words diversity and equity from their teaching standards, I believe it was. Talk about, if you would, what diversity means to you and why you want to promote it and where you think this backlash is coming from.
For me, diversity is really about how we all bring these different backgrounds, different cultures, different expertise, different lived experiences. And when I'm thinking about groups coming together to maybe solve a problem, I want a diverse range of perspectives, diverse range of strengths, backgrounds, because I think we see more when we have more voices, more eyes, more background in the conversation. And my upbringing, going from a very, it was just pretty homogenous, right? Black and brown community. And then I got introduced to white students, Jewish, Korean. I got introduced to those students by being bussed out of my community. Otherwise, I likely would not have interacted with them. It was a rich experience. When I study abroad or go to another country, I see things different, right? Being able to think from a Western mindset versus an Eastern mindset, you get a more well-rounded view of things. And so there's this power in this kind of diverse range of backgrounds and perspective. And if you want things to be more effective for a wider range of people, right? If we're talking about a global society, our globe is made up of various perspectives. You need more voices who think different than you and be able to engage with that. And how could you leverage that power of different perspectives and different backgrounds and different strengths to really accelerate whatever the mission is? In my own experience, having this diverse exchange between different cultures and groups and communities have only been an asset. I know when I come into the room, especially for a space that does not necessarily look like me, I find myself often in spaces that I'm the only Black voice, or I'm the only Black male voice. Or when I was valedictorian in Riverside County for my high school, and in the newspaper they printed out all the faces of all the valedictorians. I was the only Black face in 1999 in that paper. So I come into these spaces where I might be the only one, and I think different. Not better, I just think different. And when we're engaging in the conversation, I'll see things that others miss that could represent another group, and they'll see things that I miss. So even in my own teams, I value having various perspectives, especially gender-wise too. I'm like, I know we don't want to see gender as much, but there is an experience that if I'm growing up as a young lady or woman, it's a different experience that I get. If someone perceives me as a woman, they live a different reality than I've had to live. I need to know what that is. They need to have a voice. They need to be included so that when we're problem solving, we're considering as many factors as we can to make an informed decision.
So you make a terrific case to me, and I'm sure many of our listeners, for why diversity and celebrating it and promoting it is such an important thing to do in a democratic society for so many reasons that you enumerated. Why then do you suppose people are pushing back and deleting the word diversity out of public documents that have to do with education?
Mm-hmm. I mean, these are only going to be theories. I'm really into design thinking, so I'm a design figure. And that first step is empathy. So even if it's something that I might disagree with or seems controversial, I'm going to really want to talk to the person and understand, okay, why do you think that? Because I need that story to give me context. And oftentimes their context is informed by their history and what they grew up in. So some of my theories, there are lots of communities. I would talk about like in high school, or not high school, but in college. I was on like the assistant coaching staff for the Stanford baseball team. And that is when I learned that there are white students who have been able to grow up without ever meeting a black person. I was like, these places exist. And I guess there's some places where, like in Compton, where there's no white students, but you generally going to encounter a white person that whether you're going to school with them or not. But it just baffled me that like, oh, you could grow up somewhere and never see anyone who looks like me and be completely informed about me by watching things like music videos or the news. And the things they would say, I wouldn't necessarily get mad. It was very much in ignorance. Like they have no idea. And they would ask me, like, what am I listening to? Or like, you don't do this, or why don't you cornrow your hair? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Um, and I learned that you can grow up with really just seeing the same people, the same story, and not really be exposed to someone who looks like me. And that lack of information can make you become an adult who just lacks this awareness. And so part of my theory is that if you are like anti-diversity, you maybe didn't grow up with a whole lot of diversity. And so you haven't had the privilege of seeing the beauty of it. Or you grew up in a place where there is this kind of animosity between maybe black and white. And so you see these stereotypes of, all right, black people are lazy because the black people that I knew were lazy. And so then you grab onto that and that's what you think.
I go back to something you said when I first asked the question about why the pushback to diversity, and I really appreciated something you said, and I read something recently about the three most important words that emotionally intelligent people frequently say, and those three words are "I don't know." And your first response to me could have been, "I'll tell you why people push back against diversity. It's because," and you said, "I'm not sure I know. I can offer some theories," but you used the word empathy there, and it's really something that I'm trying to promote in this podcast by having people listen to each other. And your very emotionally intelligent response was, "I don't know. I'd have to listen to them to find out what they say." And then you went on to say, to speculate a little bit about what it could be. But it's so easy, particularly for someone like you who's experienced the things that you've experienced, to say, "I know the reason that people don't like diversity is it comes from a racist point of view, or they're afraid that people, by pushing diversity, they're doing it because they think I, as a white person, am racist, and they're trying to push their liberal values on me, and I don't like that." And there are lots of different theories that one could say, but I think it's complicated, and the reasons for the pushback probably vary a lot from one person to another. And what I appreciated about what you said is, I don't think I'd really know unless I talked to someone who felt that way. And that's really why I launched this podcast, is I think we make assumptions about why people who think differently than us think the way they do. And so we make up stories and we think we're right about it, and we tell it to our friends, and people that think like us, they reinforce that. And then we live with those narratives. And oftentimes they're not really very accurate. And the only way they can become more accurate is through empathy and saying, I don't know you well enough to know the answer, why you think the way you think, but I want to find out. I'm curious to know more. And that's what I thought you were doing with that question. And I think that's what you're doing with your student empathy network for diversity.
You are great at summing things up and making, I think you've done this before.
That's called looping, but I was doing a little more than looping. What Amanda Ripley, who I've interviewed, says that the repeating back what you think you've heard to make sure you got it right. But I must say that I interjected my own opinion in the middle of all that looping. But I'm curious just to know as we wind this up, if that makes sense to you, if that's what Send is about, and if that's what you were doing when you said, I don't know why people push back against it. For sure, I would need to talk to them. Did I have that right? That's what your reasons for pausing and say, I'm not going to offer an opinion about that?
You're definitely right there. I think you have to be willing to listen. Empathy is very important because for myself, I actually really want to understand, even if it's something that someone does and it's very like hateful, I want to understand, how did you get to that point? Why do you believe that? I want to hear you articulate it so I can have a better understanding of it and see how we might respond to that. And sometimes there is no path forward of reconciliation, but I just want to know, right, where do I actually stand and where is this person at? And then I know how to navigate that space because I have an understanding of it. Or if someone says something that I feel is racist or ignorant, I'm like, where did that come from? Especially if it's someone, that I do like have a friendship with or associate, or even someone that I love, like my parents or mother-in-law or father-in-law, or, a close family friend who grew up in a different context. I want to understand, like, why do you think that? And I know my initial jerk response, like I'm feeling it, but I need to understand why, because typically when I get that story, it all makes sense. And I may not necessarily agree with the conclusion, but it usually makes sense. And even with the cutting out things with diversity, sometimes folks just feel, right, we have all these buzzwords and they don't want to, submit to that just for the sake of it, because that's where the trend is.
Listen, Jason, I'm going to leave it there. And this is going to be the end of part one of this, a couple of episodes we're doing on this program, this really intriguing program that you've launched in Compton and in LA and in some of the partner cities like Silver Lake and down in Orange County. I want to thank you for giving our listeners the background about it and this, really to hear your personal story about being an educator and launching this program. In the next episode, we're going to hear from students. You'll be on with us as well, but we're going to hear students talk about their experience being part of it and how they benefited by being a part of it. And I'm also hoping that we will ask them and you for some advice on people listening that may want to do this elsewhere. And you had mentioned earlier that I think your dream was to see something like this kind of network, this program that you've developed to promote empathy across communities, might crop up elsewhere around the country. And I would love for you and the students to offer some guidance or some advice on how people might do that. So with that, I want to thank you, Jason, for being part of the podcast. And I look forward to having you back in just a moment when we do part two of this episode with some of your students.